I found a fun video from family history fanatics listing 7 common genealogy mistakes. I've made every single one of these mistakes and have some guidelines for avoiding them. In this video, I'll cover my principles for handling different spellings of names, specifically surnames. I have 5 things I think about when looking at name variations. 1, it's about the sound, not the spelling. 2, ignore duplicate letters and silent vowels. 3, drop the vowels, focus on the consonants. 4, drop the consonants and focus on similar sounds. And 5, consider the possibility of anglicization. First off, the written word is really an imperfect reflection of speech. It doesn't reflect the vast majority of human communication, which is via body language and tone. There's also nothing sacred about how a sound is represented in writing. My name is spelled Michael in the Latin alphabet, but those sounds are just as easily expressed in the Arabic alphabet. In other words, I could spell my name Michael, M-Y-K-U-L, and it would sound exactly the same. My second rule is to ignore letters that just don't add a sound. Consider my own surname, O'Neill, which is sometimes spelled with 1 L and sometimes with a silent E at the end. Today, that's 3 different names, but the sound is identical, and that's what you key on. Third rule, drop the vowels. Let's take the surname Devani, which could also be Divine or Divini or Devane. Are they the same surname? When you drop the vowels from all of those variants, you get 3 very clear consonant sounds: D, V, and N. By just focusing on those 3 consonants, I can mimic potential actions just by varying vowel sounds between those letters and see what sounds similar. Whether I have an A, E, I, or U between the D and the V, it sounds about the same. Devani, Deveni, Divini. Between the V and the N, the sounds represented by A, E, or I work pretty well too. The last vowel after the N is a bit trickier though, with the E and S sounds working, but really not much else. That whole exercise yields about 24 different spellings that yield very similar sounds. More important, the E sound at the end shortens the vowel, and it gets me to divina or divine. Dropping the vowels isn't always enough though. You also have to think about consonant sounds that are similar. Take Baseball Hall of Fame pitcher Stan Coveleski. If you limit yourself to the consonants C, V, L, S, and K, you could lose it. The C could be represented by a K or even a hard G, Goveleski. The sound represented by V in many languages is interchangeable with W. And the vowel sounds could be modified by W or Y. My final thought here is thinking about the impact of cultural assimilation. As an example, think about ethnic German immigrants to colonial Pennsylvania. The first generation of immigrants segregated themselves because of language and cultural barriers. The grandchildren were more closely aligned to their Pennsylvania community than to their grandparents' village in the Rhineland. And then along the way, an easy-to-say German name such as Schlauch would become cumbersome for descendants raised speaking English, and they would simplify to Slow. Same goes for Stanley Coveleski. He was born Stanislaus, but adopted the anglicized Stanley. Patriotic pressures can also play a role. In my research, I saw a sharp rate of anglicizing names across all ethnicities after the Revolution, and a more limited anglicization amongst Germans and Eastern Europeans during World War I. Standardization of spelling on names is actually a recent phenomenon, and it's a function both of increased literacy and of government programs. The former is pretty obvious. If you go back to the colonial period, you didn't go to school, you apprenticed to learn a trade, whether it was farming from your parents or as apprentice blacksmith or what have you. If your trade didn't require literacy, then you weren't literate. Or your literacy was limited to snippets of the Bible. One-room schoolhouses didn't pop up until well into the 1800s. As to the latter, governments keep records for taxation and benefits, and when you have countrywide benefits programs such as Social Security and Medicare, you have to have a certain level of standardization and consistency to avoid fraud. When you don't have those programs, your name can vary without any real consequences. In other words, the further back in history you go from the 1930s in the US, the more you'll see spelling variations. I hope you enjoyed this 5-minute genealogy video. Please subscribe to my channel and give a thumbs up. If you've got any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments.